I don't feel the sickness yet, but it's in the post, that's for sure.
We all have a favourite dream sequence, and this one in Trainspotting just so happens to be mine. Disorientating, revealing, and downright bizarre, dream sequences in movies are often the most visually impressive and insightful moments in any film. Just look at Vertigo, The Big Lebowski, or Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, and you'll clearly see what this trope can accomplish when it's in full swing. In the right hands, a dream sequence can be a very powerful storytelling tool, especially in regards to character development. Intimate aspects of personality like fears and aspirations are laid bare in the dream world, manifesting through surreal imagery that reveals so much about the characters we see on screen. But what about in games? Dream sequences as a whole seem to be a little less common. However, because game sequences are an interactive medium, they can offer the opportunity for players to physically experience the sensation of being inside someone's dream or nightmare. By being able to play and immerse yourself deep into a character's subconscious, games potentially offer a more effective means of forming a connection and building empathy with a character than through film. I love dream sequences in games, so I wanted to take a brief look into their power and what they can accomplish, with a focus on how they can help us build a connection with our characters and bring us deeper into the world of the game. Let's start things off with one of my favourites, Shovel Knight, which has a remarkably simple and effective dream sequence. After beating a level, Shovel Knight falls asleep and he dreams of seeing his loved one falling from the sky. Catch her is the only instruction given as his hands reach out to the sky to save her. Shovel Knight barely has any dialogue in the whole game, but this simple sequence conveys so much about his character without any speech. It reminds us of what his mission is, while showing us his fears and his motivation. Later in the game you'll have to do the same dream, but you have to fend off monsters while she falls. Even when you're surrounded by danger, you're compelled to do the selfless thing and dive in to save her. The game itself is full of great platforming, but it was this simple moment when the game really won me over. I got the full measure of why Shovel Knight fights, and I wanted to make his dreams a reality. Batman also gets to experience his fair share of nightmares in the Arkham games, particularly when Scarecrow gets inside his head during Arkham Asylum. Crane's fear gas exposes Batman to his personal demons, which manifests from his childhood trauma of witnessing his parents' death. As stalwart as Batman appears, the death of his parents still has its claws in him, and this is a great way to show that.
Father, you should have stood up to him, son. Like a man.
He often lies to himself and others about how much it affects him, but it's clearly a wound that hasn't healed. While Batman's backstory has been shown in various comics and films over the years, this is one of the first times you actually get to play out this moment and experience it from his perspective. In a way, this is a really great litmus test for the power of the scene over a film version. For as well shot as Zack Snyder's take on this scene is, the version in the game is much more emotionally compelling and engaging because you get to play it out. By the end, Batman regresses back into a child, and it's a powerful moment. You don't feel like a badass crime fighter, you feel and move just like a lonely little boy who doesn't know how to process what he's just seen. But perhaps the best example of a nightmare in a game can be found in Max Payne, as he revisits the fateful night that stole his family away from him over and over again in his mind. The entire game is a revenge trip, and while the story starts with a flashback, Max eventually suffers from recurring nightmares from the home invasion that gets increasingly sinister. For Max, that moment in his life would have felt unreal, like walking through a dream, and the game captures that feeling perfectly, with a disorientating fisheye perspective and an almost slow-mo pace of movement. To top it all off is the horrifying sound of his baby wailing, which still gives me goosebumps. Max could have just said in the cutscene, "My wife and kids are dead," in his deliciously grizzled voice, but by actually playing out his nightmare, we learn so much more about him and how that experience has moulded him. We get to live out the way he wrestles with that memory and the grief that surrounds it by running through yawning labyrinths and crossing blood-slick tightropes over a black abyss. For the love of God, don't fall in. The dream sequences return to similar effect in Max Payne 2, but are bizarrely absent in the third game, which ironically had the biggest focus on being a character study in the franchise. Max feels oddly guarded for the whole game. He's gruff, prickly, and cocky. But he doesn't feel as human as he did in the previous games. The lack of any playable dream sequence is truly a missed opportunity. While the subtext of a dream tells us a lot, sometimes a dream is just a good excuse for the developers to get creative with the visuals and the level design. These are the moments that take you by surprise and make you say, wow. Scenes like Gregory's imaginative bath time in What Remains of Edith Finch, or some of the surreal nightmares from Virginia, are awe-inspiring and delightfully bizarre. I always find myself totally charmed by spectacles like these because they're always unlike anything else I've seen or experienced as a gamer. Alternately, there are impressively grotesque visuals found in nightmares, like this one in Hellblade, when Senua arrives in the Sea of Corpses. It's a hideous world full of grasping hands and towering bodies, all connected by a deep river of blood. When you first arrive, it's hard not to be taken aback by the sheer scope of it all. Up to this point, combat has felt quite easy, but here you face an unrelenting gauntlet of foes. You fight harder than ever before because you don't want to die here, I mean just look at this place. But after you get through it, you feel taller somehow. Probably because Senua has literally fought her way through her own personal hell. The determination and adrenaline in her eyes is palpable once she emerges from the nightmare. After tackling that, you feel like you can take on anything Hela can throw at you. Other games delight in messing with your expectation and toying with your internal compass by constructing environments with a twisted dream logic. A great example of this is one of the many endings of the Stanley Parable, where you find yourself trapped within an impossible infinite loop. You stumble into a fairly plain-looking corridor while hunting for your co-workers, yet this one just keeps on going and going and going. The corridor doesn't even loop in a circle, it zigzags in a fairly straight path, but you always end up at the same starting point.
And for that matter, these rooms were starting to look pretty familiar. Were they simply repeating? "I'm dreaming!" he yelled. "This is all a dream!"
It catches you off guard, giving you a claustrophobic sense of deja vu, and it plays with what you think is logistically possible. It feels like the roaming shot from The Shining with Danny on his bike, it just never ends. You walk through this endless corridor for about 5 minutes until Stanley and the narrator finally decide they've had enough.
And everything went black.
I absolutely love gameplay sections that surprise me and fill my head with wonder. There's a joyful sense of creativity unleashed within all these moments, and that's a real pleasure to see. Dream sequences open the floodgates for memorable and creative gaming moments, since they're not bound by the laws of reality, and they'll often leave your jaw on the floor due to the sheer amount of imagination on display. In most of the examples above, the dream sequences only take up the space of a few minutes. There is one game though, that takes the concept of dreaming and exploring the subconscious and spins it across the entire game. Psychonauts. Set in a summer camp for psychic children, you take control of Raz as he travels between the minds of several characters. One world looks like a twisted suburban cul-de-sac, and another takes the form of a tiny city full of terrified fish people. Every mind is totally different. Eventually, you'll even travel to an insane asylum and poke around in the minds of its inmates to experience some truly creative and wondrous worlds. As wacky and bizarre as each world initially appears, they're all grounded by the personality of each person you inhabit. Scattered around each level are a pair of memory banks that reveal a lot about the character's past and how the shame or trauma affects the state of their mind and the world around you. A great example would be Gloria's Theatre, where the level resembles a stage rehearsal night where the show constantly fluctuates between comedy and tragedy to reflect the split personality Gloria developed after hearing of her mother's suicide. This level is a means of showing you how she perceives the world around her after the incident, and it's hauntingly effective. One of the more understated individual stories surrounds Mia, one of the camp's teachers. On the surface level, she's a cool, fun-loving hippie. Her mind and world is full of bright colours, floating bubbles, and the whole thing looks a bit like the music video for Funky Town. But tucked away in a tiny nook is a portal where Mia keeps her inner demon suppressed. Opening the memory vault here will reveal that she was once the ward for an orphanage that burnt down with several children inside. And if you listen closely, you can hear their voices blaming her.
Why did you let us die? Why did you help us?
What makes this revelation so haunting is how unexpected it is. On the surface level it's all smiles and sunshine, but under the surface she's dealing with some very real issues. After you've seen her demons, you'll see Mia in a totally different light. All these little things in Psychonauts go so far in establishing such a memorable and diverse cast. Once you're done poking around in their minds, you'll feel like you've walked a mile in their shoes, and then you can begin to understand and empathise with them. Again, this is the main thing that separates film from games. The power to physically control these characters allows you to physically experience their dreams from their perspective, so you can really get into their headspace and form a tighter bond with that character. In several games, you just mow through hordes of bad guys or complete objectives like some kind of robot. And beyond a quick setup, we don't know what drives them or why they fight. Obviously, I don't need an extensive backstory or a psychiatric analysis for every character I play as, but when you're playing as someone with an established personality and a stake in that world, then a trip into their subconscious can help the player form a connection with that character and resonate with their plight. An awful lot of character can be conveyed in a dream, but the fact these characters even have dreams humanises them further. We all dream. We all have hopes, desires, fears, and demons. But we guard these things closely because we consider them a weakness. But a good dream sequence will lay all these aspirations and anxieties out in the open. After seeing someone go through similar insecurities as our own, it somehow makes our issues feel a bit smaller. It's comforting to know that someone else is going through the exact same thing as you, and this is how true empathy is formed. Granted, we may not all have murdered families or a lover gone missing, but by playing as a dreamer who is constantly driven to fight their internal fears or chase their dreams, It gives us the confidence to do the same. I'd love to see more dreamers in games, because not only do they give us some unique and beautiful levels to play in, but they provide us with some of the most tangible and inspiring characters in the medium.